As we all know, parkour is one of the three main gameplay pillars of Assassin's Creed, and it could be argued that it is the most important, despite also being the most overlooked. And let's be honest, based on the gameplay that we've seen for Assassin's Creed Shadows, it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
A lot of people like to bundle the systems into groups based on engines used for each game, like one being AC1 in the Ezio trilogy, another being the Kenway series, and the infamously simplified Parkour of the RPG trilogy. But if you look closely and actually take the time to mess around with each game's systems, you start to notice some slight differences between each individual game, whether that be animation improvements, or additions to traversal, or even something as simple as the world design. Each game has something that makes them unique in terms of parkour, and that's what today's video is going to be about. So sit back, relax, and join me as we look at what each Assassin's Creed game did well in terms of parkour. So we do have to give this game credit for being first in the series and pioneering the parkour system that will be expanded upon in the future. But what it seems to do better than subsequent releases is its true sense of freeform. Things like being able to side eject from any angle, vaulting as well, which is something that is absent from the Ezio games, and just the general world design really opens this game up in a way that hasn't really been replicated in any Assassin's Creed game since. While Assassin's Creed 2 does strip out those more complex elements that I previously mentioned about AC1, you could say it takes the roots of that system and streamlines it, while also speeding up elements like climbing walls. The main move we see added here is the leap grab that Ezio learns from the Thieves Guild later on in the game, and it is used to clear larger gaps when climbing buildings, thus opening up climbing routes that were once inaccessible.
So, how did I do?
Your shit, mate!
You wound me with your cruel words.
What I'd argue Assassin's Creed 2 does best though is its level of variety between the different environments portrayed in the game. For example, Venice, Florence, Tuscany, they all feel like very distinct different cities. We don't really get that from any other game in the series. Brotherhood, Revelations, Unity, Syndicate, they all just stick to one city that basically looks the same throughout. Nothing ever really feels different as you progress through the game. Whereas in 2, because you visit different cities as you go throughout, it always feels fresh, it always feels distinct. It's just so much nicer than just sticking with one city. It's kind of one thing the RPG games did do well, like Origins having multiple cities that all do feel rather distinct. Valhalla as well, even though the cities aren't that well designed, Jorvik and London are two very different cities. They don't feel the same at all, and that's probably what Assassin's Creed 2 does best at compared to the other classic games in the series. I initially struggled to think of something unique about Brotherhood's parkour, as it is basically the same system as Assassin's Creed 2. The only notable thing Brotherhood adds to my knowledge is the horse flips, and when disregarding the definitive parkour mod, they are fairly pointless, as you can only use them when jumping from a horse. This massively limits the places you can perform them in game. For example, any kind of beam or pole that's anywhere high up near a rooftop is basically unusable with this animation, unless you are using the mod. Some people may also point to the addition of parachutes as the best addition to Brotherhood's parkour, but I don't really see that as addition to the parkour per se. It's more of a crutch to save you when you make a mistake or you screw up during a parkour run, or in terms of just quick traversal from one place to another. They don't really enhance the parkour experience, like say the hook blade from Revelations. Speaking of, so yeah, the hook blade. This allows you to climb even faster than you could in the previous Ezio games. The slight extension to your reach also allows you to catch ledges further away, which I'm sure we can all admit has saved our asses a couple of times. The hook blade also allows you to perform a separate type of swing from the objects you tend to see on the corner of buildings. Instead of just using them to swing around corners, you can also swing forward with your hook blade to cover gaps as seen here. The hook blade also allows you to take advantage of zip lines scattered across Constantinople, which lets you cover large distances in short amounts of time. These few features alone make the hook blade the greatest addition to Revelations parkour. See, for me, this is where parkour took a downturn. Probably the best thing AC3 added was the inclusion of vaults. I find myself doing them all the time while running through Boston and New York. Most people would probably point to tree climbing as the best addition from this game. I honestly rate it as being rather mid though. It can be buggy at times, it's not always clear where you have to start climbing from, and it doesn't really look that realistic. I mean, have you seen how thin some of those branches are? They're not going to support the weight of a normal human being, let alone the absolute beefcake that is Connor Kenway.
What the fuck, man?
Some people may also say building pass-throughs are the best part, but again, I'd argue against that, because the amount of basically just being a little cutscene. They take away your control, they play a little scripted animation, and then essentially just spit you out the other side. So again, the best thing AC3 added? Vaults. This is basically the exact same system as AC3. Probably the best thing about AC4 parkour is the city of Havana. It more closely resembles that tight layout we saw in the older games, as opposed to the wide open streets of Boston and New York like we see in Assassin's Creed 3. You can come up with some pretty decent parkour routes here if you set your mind to it. It's just a shame the other cities aren't as well designed for parkour. You know, Kingston, Nassau, they more closely resemble the level design that we saw in Assassin's Creed 3. Again, not much to talk about here really. It's the exact same system as Assassin's Creed 4, but it's actually a little bit worse because it takes the setting back to that of Assassin's Creed 3, i.e. New York and the frontier, and it suffers the same problems because of it. Apart from a few new contextual items like scaffolds and the hook swings, there's really not much to talk about here. It's probably best if we just move on to the next game, as I know this is the one a lot of you have been waiting for. This is where Ubisoft tried to completely change the system up and modernise it for the next generation. This may be a hot take nowadays, but I honestly think this system is a lot worse than what we got before.
Oh no!
I'm not going to go into it now, as it's a topic for its own video really, but in my opinion, the best thing this system added was a dedicated parkour down button. Just having the ability to hold B and do a controlled descent without any worry at all is still pretty satisfying to this day. Although I do kind of believe it somewhat takes the skill out of working out your own routes of getting down buildings. But since the average player is not even going to bother with that and just jump off and take the damage anyway, it does make sense from a casual point of view. So initially I was under the impression that this game was basically a carbon copy of Unity's parkour, just with the addition of the grapple hook. But upon reflection, I decided to speak to fellow Assassin's Creed YouTuber Jabaki, as he has way more knowledge on Syndicate than I do. So basically this section is just going to be me reading out the messages he sent me regarding parkour in Syndicate. So let's start with a grapple. Frankly, because of the nature of where the game was set, it was a necessity. You can't really navigate certain areas quickly without it. Of course it could have had a lot more utility in regards particularly to movement, like being able to swing with it, kind of like Spider-Man, and what we see in Assassin's Creed Shadows now. But overall, it serves its function as a support tool for parkour. That's something that most players don't realise, because they'd rather do the easy movement. Like how most players don't know that you could side hop in Unity, and even in Syndicate, until a few people who took the time to experiment with the system discovered and shared, and how most players never even utilised side ejects in the older games, or vaulting in AC1, because the truth is, most players don't want to. They'd rather just know they can do it right away in a tutorial, than have to figure it out for themselves. Which is kind of strange for an AC game, because you're usually just tutorialized on the base moveset and left to do your own thing. So the point I'm trying to get across is that the grapple does in fact improve parkour, but specifically in Syndicate, because of the level of verticality and the one-to-one scale of all the buildings. So while it is entirely possible to navigate the city without it, it is more convenient to use it when you don't feel like climbing a really tall building. But it can also be a detractor, because when faced with a situation when the player can feasibly parkour without the grapple from point A to point B, they'll use the grapple anyway, because it's convenient, and then blame the grapple for existing. You aren't forced to use the grapple if you don't want to. The game wasn't designed around the grapple, but rather the grapple was designed to help navigate certain parts of the city and provide players with a convenient alternative. Whether you use it or not is up to the individual, as you can see evidence in my parkour videos. Sometimes I'll use it, sometimes I won't. It's not mandatory. Now we've got that out of the way, I can tell you the good things Syndicate does do with its parkour. 1. You have a lot more control over your character with this iteration of the Unity style system. When you give an input, it is much easier to predict how your player character will respond than it is in Unity. For example, diving. While both Unity and Syndicate are context sensitive when it comes to inputs, in this particular case dives, Syndicate's controls are more consistent input and context wise when compared to Unity. In my experience in Syndicate, it's consistent that the angle of your camera and relative distance of the player from the dive spot will affect which input you use, and how these inputs have clear rules you can follow, and you can replicate a move 9 out of 10 times once you have the angle and input right. Just include the down input along with the others for a safe dive. While in Unity, since you are depending purely on inputs and your camera won't affect the outcome, you're at Arno's mercy. Sometimes you'll need to hold high profile and jump, other times high profile and parkour down, other times just tap the parkour down button in high profile. What I'm getting at is, even if you know all the possible inputs for a dive, whether or not you trigger the dive isn't entirely up to you, which can make trying to repeat a dive from the same spot a bloody nightmare. The second thing is the weight of most animations feel more realistic. Overall, Syndicate's inputs are a lot more consistent than AC Unity and not as floaty. So yeah, thank you for that, Jabaki, that is a massive help. We've got into basically more detail on Syndicate than we have in any other game on this video, so I'm sure you'll be happy about that. Also, thank you for letting me use your gameplay in this clip, you are a massive star. Be sure to go check out Jabaki's channel and subscribe to him if you haven't already. Some great Assassin's Creed content right there. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Most people see this game as the start of Ubisoft really not caring about parkour in the series. While I can see where they're coming from, the system actually keeps a bit more of Unity's guts than most people realise. I also personally find it slightly more controllable than Unity. I always know exactly what Bike is going to do when performing moves in this game, whereas with Arno in Unity, he could do fucking whatever. Yes, that's probably a skill issue to some people, but I guarantee even seasoned Unity players will tell you that the game does not control very well. The main issue with Origins is that apart from a few tiny select areas, there really isn't anywhere to show off these moves. There's still beam swings, dive beams. The game technically does have vaults, it's just that Ubisoft in their infinite wisdom decided to disable them.
Black, are you dumb? Are you getting rude to man? That's what you get, fam. Push you. Yeah, Black.
But a modder was able to re-enable them with just a few changes to the code, which while amazing does not help it here, as like I said before, we're not counting mods in this video. The coolest and most notable thing Origins added was probably the backflip leap of faith. While it's been technically possible since the Ezio games, they'd really made it stand out and look cool here. Using it to cap off a run is always satisfying. Basically the exact same system as Origins, but with one notable addition. They actually enabled the vaults. It's just a shame because Greece seems to have even less places to utilise it.
Where is it? 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 Where is it?
That was the main thing I noticed when enabling the mod in Origins. There's so many vaultable objects spread across Egypt. It makes it even more damning that they omitted it from that game and included it here. Apart from that, there is nothing new or notable about Odyssey Parkour. It's actually even worse because they've taken out fall damage completely, which just goes to show how much of a non-factor it is to Ubisoft at this point. Again, this is basically the exact same system from Origins and Odyssey.
Oh shit, here we go again.
But they somehow managed to make it worse. They do this in two ways. One being that the animations in general are just slower in this game. Eivor runs and climbs around like she's wearing fucking concrete boots. They also made the controls significantly worse. In the previous RPG games, movement was done purely with the left analog stick. Moving it a bit would make you jog, and pushing it all the way would make you sprint. meaning you are always in the running state, ready for parkour no matter what. Whereas in Valhalla, you have to click the left analog stick in order to sprint. This makes it really awkward when trying to perform specific moves, as it isn't always clear whether Eivor is in a running or jogging state, which obviously changes what moves she will perform. The one new inclusion that you could argue adds something is the new slide ability, where holding B while sprinting will make Eivor slide across the floor. You can pair this with things like vaults and ledge hangs to create some really cool moves, but other than that, it's a fairly inconsequential addition. Now people will probably argue with me and say this is the same system as Valhalla, but it actually has a few small tweaks that make it better than all of the RPG games combined. While the default controls still use that same horrible click the stick to sprint approach that Valhalla took, you can actually modify the controls to your liking. Setting it so you have to hold the right trigger to sprint allows for so much more control when moving through the world, and it means you can always tell whether you are actually sprinting or not.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait. Yeah, that did it! Yeah, bitch!
Another amazing thing about this game is the city of Baghdad. It is easily the best parkour playground we've seen since Unity's Paris, and I'd argue it actually surpasses that game in terms of city design. Just the sheer density of the buildings, how many small interactable items are spread across it, reminds me so much of the Ezio trilogy. I'd probably compare it best to Constantinople from Revelations. But in terms of actual parkour mechanics, the best thing about the game, funnily enough, wasn't even there on release. As part of the update that released about 2 months after the game launched, Update 1.06 increased the range that Basim can perform side and back ejects. This was a much needed improvement, because when the game released, they basically functioned the exact same as the RPG games, which meant they may as well have been non-existent. This update actually made them usable, and nowadays you can pull off some pretty sweet runs when you use them properly. So that just about does it for this video. Again, not going into too much detail here, as I really could do an equally sized video for each game in the series, and I'd still miss out on some details. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. This was my first time attempting a commentary style video like this, so any criticism is welcome. I know sometimes I don't pronounce words as clearly as I should due to my accent, but that is something I can continue to work on. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more in the future, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I assume if you got to this point in the video, you do have a real passion for Assassin's Creed parkour, so why not check out some of the choreographed runs I've posted on the channel. There's plenty to see from basically every game in the series. So yeah, thanks for watching guys, see you in the next one.